So chatbots, for all intents and purposes, are a conversational interface, right? It's a different way of user experience. And I'll get into the notion of user experience and how that transforms into chatbots and that sort of thing. But the most important thing to take away from this is it is a conversational modality of interaction. And the other thing is that it is something that is becoming more and more important. It's seeping its way into the technology scene. So I think it's an important thing for all of us to start paying attention to. So having had as much technology experience as I've had, I thought, oh, it'll be really, really easy. Oh, like chatbots. I mean, what could there be to these silly little, interfaces that you see chatting at you annoyingly? And what I found since I started digging into these things was that they are extremely complicated and yet very simple. And they're complicated in the sense of if you explore them beyond the basic sort of decision tree and start getting into other things like artificial intelligence and cloud-based stuff and whatnot, there's some huge complexity there. So what I did find, and I made a note, is if you've ever noticed that you, for example, when you're having a child, right, and suddenly you never saw baby carriages before, and suddenly you see them everywhere. They were always there, but you didn't see them. And this is what I found with this, is once I got sort of tuned in to the whole notion of chatbots, I suddenly saw them where I never saw them before. And they are all over the place. We just don't always realize it. Okay, so a little bit about me. I've been in the industry for about 35 years. I actually graduated in 1980. And my background was initially in hardware engineering, but over time I evolved over into the software engineering and system design practice, and I learned there was this new system coming out called Unix, right? And I thought, whoa, what is this? And so I really kind of got more and more involved in this. I'm very much interested in the open system side of things, which Unix is a big part of. And from that technology background, I evolved into various management roles and all the way up to executive level in some smaller businesses. And so it was a great opportunity to learn about a lot of different industries and a lot of different roles and responsibilities within those companies. So the key employers that I was involved with, Northern Telecom, which man, was that a pleasant experience. Amdahl, which is a mainframe computer company that competes with IBM, so very large mainframe installations. And I was in the data communications side of things, so we were, at a time when the internet really didn't exist, we were doing things like connecting up computers from location to location and that sort of thing. Very expensive stuff to do at that time. And we've certainly come a long, long way since then. And then I evolved through other kinds of software, I worked for Siemens next door for a while, and ModComp, which was in telephone, ModComp was in real-time systems, so it was real-time Unix, and so I thought, wow, like, this is really cool, Unix, real-time, okay, I'll give it a shot. And then moved on to SwitchView, which was in basically collecting call records from SL1 switches and that sort of thing, and producing reports on call traffic for telephone switches. OpenText, which I started at when they were about 100 people and left when they were, I don't know, 7,000 or 8,000, whatever. So I saw a lot of growth over a number of years there. Then I went to a company actually in London called Entry Software, which develops web-based project management software, and I worked with them for a while. And then from that point forward, my career kind of moved into things like digital signage, interactive kiosks, that sort of thing. So, and that was like Fred Systems Digital Display Communication, which was then bought by Simplex and became Simplex Digital Media. And actually, a company in town, EK3, was purchased by our division. So I was very connected at that level to this community. So I guess that's kind of was my introduction to this space. My inspiration for this talk was Ashley. So in June of 2016, she did a component of a larger presentation. And chatbots was something I was sort of viscerally aware of, but I really never gave much thought to. And she did a presentation on that. It was just a brief presentation, but it really, really piqued my interest. And so I thought, I got to learn more about this. And so my goal for this, I'm not going to get too terribly technical here. It's mostly conceptual stuff. But my goal for this is to hopefully inspire a few of you to get interested in very, very interesting technology. And she introduced us to something called Esther-bot. So if we think of user experience is sort of the concept of interacting with something. It's not constrained to just what many of us are used to thinking of, like computers and screens and that sort of thing. It's basically an interaction. It's an experience that people have with a chair, with a light, with a fridge, with, making sure that your computer actually fires up. And all of these are various user experiences. So it's a wonderful user experience when you can take your computer, plug this thing in, and boom, it comes up. And you don't spend the next 15, 20 minutes, futzing around. So, somebody's thought of it, ease of use, plug and play, make it work. Good user experience. So in terms of chatbots, it's a user experience, like a chatbot has many modalities. Generally when people are interacting with a chatbot, they're thinking of something like they might see on Facebook, where there's that little thing in the corner, and hi, how are you doing? Or you interact with something on Messenger, or maybe you go to some store and it says, oh, and sometimes you get fooled into thinking it's a person. Say, that's not a person. No. What it is some sort of programmatic experience. Now, what Facebook is doing, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, is something called a hybrid model. So they're using a tree structure kind of decision tree chatbot, but they're also mixing it with other types of things like artificial intelligence, other chatbots, people, right? All kinds of interesting things. Because the technology just isn't quite there yet. There's a lot that has to be done before it completely stands on its own. But for certain types of problem sets, it does. So the other points that I'm making here are that in order for a user experience with a chatbot to be effective, you have to create a personality, right? If we're talking about something that is a conversation between people, then it needs to feel like you're actually talking to some sort of personality. So the less personality it has, the less engaging the experience, right? And so you'll see that, the designers of these things are recognizing this, but unfortunately they're putting up really, really annoying personalities, right? If you think about something like, the earlier days of Microsoft Word and the little paperclip thing that comes up, it's like, oh my God, where is the thing to turn this damn thing on? It is annoying the hell out of me. That is not a good user experience. Right? So personality is important. Understanding human psychology is a very important thing. I mean, it's important in general in terms of user interface design, but it becomes even more important when you're thinking about chatbots and humans having a conversation, in effect, with it. And then the last and really important thing from a user experience standpoint So, why chatbots? If you think of traditional interfaces are all about static or somewhat dynamic boxes, drop-downs, dialogues, selectors, etc., some verbiage, pop-ups, that sort of thing. And generally speaking, these are things that require some level of knowledge and training. Right? It's not natural for people to sit down, if they've never used a computer before, sit down and use it. And yet look at texting. Texting is just like, in such a short period of time, become, like, because it's so natural, it's just, you're having a conversation. I mean, you're using a skill that you know, which is interacting with a keyboard. But beyond that, there's not much more that you need to know to text, other than how to have a conversation. So what chatbots kind of throw on the table, so a couple of other important things are, like, something like texting is a very ubiquitous or everywhere kind of technology, whereas you can create certain types of interfaces, and they're very, very geared towards the platform that they're on, the application that they're being used for, etc. But when you get into more chatbot kinds of experiences, it becomes something you can use anywhere, right? So that's a really important thing. Chatbots, on the other hand, they're natural. They're a natural conversational process. They, comparatively speaking, are easy to design. Well, you know, when I first started going through this, what I learned from just playing around with, you know, some chatbot tools was all of the verbiage that I was reading was saying, oh, easy design, easy design, easy design. And I guess from the perspective of coding, that's true, right? It's harder to develop, you know, complex interfaces with, you know, the tools that we use for whatever it is, whether it's doing it right at the down and dirty where you're coding on command line, or whether you're doing it through some sort of, IDE or something like that. But the complexity I've learned in chatbots is the logic of the conversation. If you're doing like a decision tree-based chatbot, then, and you know, you'll see when I show you the example that it seems really, really simple, but I really had to constrain it because it's so easy to go off in so many different directions. And so one of the things that kind of led me down this path as well was a client who was interested in putting a chatbot on their site. And so I asked them to give me, you know, some questions related to their domain of business, and they sent me, it's probably about 100 or so. Wow, it's going to take a long time to codify this. So I think it'll be a process of going through and saying, okay, well, what are the most important things first? And then codify those, get that up and running, and then just kind of add to it as you go along. So, sort of easy. Again, the ubiquity is really related to the fact that at a fundamental level, it's really kind of like texting. And the nice thing about this is that it's a very scalable technology. I mean, texting is just growing like crazy. But it also is scalable in other ways, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But it's scalable in the sense of the way that it can be deployed across everything and across time. If you have well-designed chatbots with logic and supporting AI and other chatbots supporting chatbots and on and on, if you have a good infrastructure, you need less and less people, which means you can scale this around the world, right? From a support perspective, this can be a very amazing thing. And then I saw this term and I thought it was really cool. Part of the Legoization of cloud robotics. Wow, that really kind of, you know, because we've got AI, we've got the cloud, we've got robotics, we've got chatbots, we've got conversational user experience, user interfaces. And you start putting all this stuff together in these little bits and pieces and whatnot, you can start creating some pretty massively amazing stuff out of these Lego bits. So I thought it was kind of a cool idea. So what is it? Well, it's something basically designed to have a conversation with a person, right? At its most fundamental level. So if you think of it, again, going back to texting, texting can be with a chatbot, right? And what are you doing? You're having a conversation with it. You're asking it questions. It's giving you answers. You're making decisions, etc. So it's just a conversation. Typically implemented in either text only, graphic and text, but you can also add things like, other elements, interface elements like images, drop down. Like you can add all the normal user interface things to a chatbot, but at its basic level, it's just a conversation engine. And the other interesting thing is if you start extending this out, a chatbot can become all kinds of interesting things. Like, say you have, something like, what is it? I think it's called Leapfrog, that thing that allows you, it's a really simple interface that allows you to kind of, create some sort of interface that's based on motions and your hands moving around and stuff like that. I mean, one of many. But if you start thinking about it, you could use that as a method of conversation. Think about it, applying it to people who do sign language and they want to sign language through a chatbot to a computer. Why not? In terms of its deployment, right now, typically chatbots are being deployed in sales and customer support roles because it's the place that really is the easiest to pop them into, right? For example, with the insurance company that I'm looking at, basically I said, you understand your domain of business. You understand the kinds of questions that people are going to ask you, and you understand that there are a finite number of responses to those questions. Right? And there are some questions that there are no sort of scripted answers to. That requires a human. So if you take something like that, you analyze that, and you put together all of these lists of questions and possible answers and the interconnections and stuff like that, you can completely codify a significant level of your support or your selling for a product or a service, right? Because you know the questions, you know the answers, and then if you hit something where they're asking something that you cannot come up with an answer in your dictionary of answers, then you just say, okay, well, I'll get a human for you. Right? And you say, excuse me, I'm not sure, let me get somebody for you, or whatever, however you handle that particular turn in the road. Right now, they're more commonly rules-based, but with the advances in AI, they're moving more and more to self-learning models. So you have a basic AI engine, and that AI engine may or may not have access to a lot of information. It may or may not have, some knowledge already. But the more important thing that it does is when it asks a question, it has the opportunity, when it gets a response that says, that's not quite what I was looking for, to ask a question and say, well, what would be a good answer to the thing that you're looking for? Cool. Park that in my data. I am now growing into something that has more and more capability, all by itself, just purely through interacting with the world. And that's where we start to get into, okay, what's the positive potential of this, and what's the scary potential of this, right? And if you think about, AI, cloud, networks, security, we think it's good, but maybe not as good as we think. Okay, smart computers, learning, figuring their way, hacking through security, getting onto networks that they shouldn't be. Networks might be attached to things that you may not want them to be attached to, like robotic devices or missiles, whatever. And you can start to paint, a wonderful sci-fi picture. I mean, that's the potential that can come of this. And so there is a certain social responsibility that we have in terms of how we deploy these things. It has yet to be seen whether or not we're an enlightened enough species to be able to do this. But, so the last one, the moderated by human, was the thing I was talking about. And this is something that Facebook is actually employing quite a bit. As they learn and kind of make a better platform, they have an involvement of people who are, sometimes their answer, like there are people who are going to answer questions, and And sometimes there are people who are monitoring and then, oh, it's going in the wrong direction, they'll guide it down a different path so that, we get to where we want to go, and then they make some notes and they make some changes, and that's how this whole thing evolves. So the overall trending in general is, well, for the internet, over the next few years, there's going to be more and more video. Like I heard, I don't know where they come up with the numbers for these predictions, but they're, I've read in a number of places where they say 80% of the internet will be video interaction, and that more and more people will be interacting with the internet through messaging platforms, which are, perfect places for chatbots. And there's a statement I found which, when I first saw it, whoa, no, it can't be true. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought about human behavior, I thought, yes, it probably is true. And we'll get to that in a minute. But generally, the trend is we're moving more towards messaging platforms, which are more like the things we hold in our hands and less the things we sit at. And there will still be jobs that require this, but most people will not require this. They will be able to do whatever they need to do as this evolves, right? In terms of its capability, its access to, knowledge and tools and stuff like that, the legalization of the cloud, right? So that being said, whether we want this to happen or not, the fact of the matter is that if more people use it and it becomes a competitive advantage for companies, then more companies are going to use it. They've got to get in the game to keep up, right? It becomes a race. If these things are in fact truly advancing the ability of a company to respond in terms of sales and in terms of service, then everybody's going to start doing it. It's just a matter of time, right? And that will drive the evolution of the technology. So this is just, you've probably seen these. I just threw that up as a picture for anybody who hasn't seen, an example of a chatbot. Like, so this is a kind of a medical assistant kind of bot that asks you some questions about, have you been doing something you shouldn't have been doing? Oh, naughty you, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, so the benefits. The benefits of a chatbot environment are, because it's a natural way for people are conversational. If you create conversational interfaces, it's going to be easier for people to use them, plain and simple. Huge benefit. A simplified interface model, because you can, as I said, a chatbot can be a text, right? It can just be a text interaction. What simpler interface can you have than that, right? 724 response to requests is, as the chatbots get more and more information in what they can access, then because they're non-human, they're available to answer your questions whenever you want. You wake up at 3 in the morning, you want to ask a question, it's there, it's ready, and it's going to answer consistently. Right? The better allocation of human resources. So in the early days, as we deploy chatbots that are more rules-based, they're not yet far enough along in AI, but more rules-based type systems. What that does is it frees up humans who are currently answering the phones and saying, what do you want, what do you want, what do you want, and leading them through some sort of script. You can now shift that more useful talent to dealing with more complex problems, right? So you're able to, now, in some cases, the people who are doing those scripted jobs are doing that because that's the skill set they have, right? And unfortunately, those people will either have to get retrained or find another line of work, right? But the benefit certainly to corporate, North America, corporate world, is that you now free up a bunch of resources that don't have to answer phones anymore, that can go off and do things that only humans can do. So that is definitely a benefit. Some people would say that's not a benefit, right? But, it's like when, the telegraph showed up on the scene, it wasn't a benefit to the Pony Express, but it had So reduction in sales support and diagnostic costs because you now have a system that can take care of a lot of this stuff and can take care of it in a very consistent way and amplifies the capabilities of humans. It allows the business to scale faster, and it's driven by user engagement. And this is really, really interesting, is especially when they become AI-based, is your population of users is teaching your business how to be better. Really, really big benefit, right? Because people take stuff in, they process it in their own unique way. They're all doing the same script, but they're handling it in a different way. They may respond in, different degrees. But if you have something that is designed to, kind of take this and analyze it and say, how can I do this better? And it's a programmatic kind of thing. It can only help make the business better by virtue of the number of people who are knocking on their door. Okay. Yeah, maybe I will. Okay, so this is a short video that I put in there. Okay, this is where I say, computer, play video. There we go.
Hi, I'm Chris from Watson. And I'm also Chris, also from Watson. And today we're going to show you how to build a pretty simple Watson chatbot that can actually book some flights for you. So, we're going to actually use Watson through Twitter. So you want to book a flight. You're very keen on this idea. I am. I want to go on holiday. It is the summer. Get out of it, don't you? Yes. So we're going to have to create a new conversation. So we do that just by pressing on that little plus button there. And I'm going to now put in the correct intent for booking a flight. So this is pre-trained, just to save time on the video, but it took me just about 2 or 3 minutes just to put in the right intent for booking a flight.
I'm not sure if
So,
I'm going to the whole video. So if I wanted to show
You
this
say you
to
want to book a
see
flight,
the
what am I going
process
to do next, do you think?
using a
I'll ask you a
tool
question.
for
Where do you
building
want to
it.
go? Yeah, you asked me where I want to go, so. Okay. So let's do that first, right? Where do you want to go? So that's got our conversation started, right? Where do you want to go? Then I'm going to put in, so I'm going to put in my airport name or city. In fact, yeah. So let's just make that work now. So the next thing we're expecting is an airport. Yeah. So I can just say, correct, at airport. That means any airport that you type in that I know about, I'm going to accept that as an airport. And those are my entities, is it? Yeah, those are entities, absolutely. Yeah. So we defined our list of airports, bit of reference name. We could have imported those or typed them in or get them from a database or whatever. So we've got our entities there ready to go with airport. So what I'm going to do now, just to save a little bit of typing time, because I'm not very quick on typing, I'm just going to paste in what we need to put in here. Because we want to do 2 things when you respond here. We want to respond and give you, ask you the next question in the sequence so that we can build up the information we need to book you your flight. But we also need to remember what you've chosen as your airport, where you want to go to. Yeah. So context, okay. Yeah, it's all about context, right? As we go through the conversation, we're building up context to help us to take action on behalf of the user. So I'm going to do a bit of cut and pasting here. I'm going to set this onto advanced mode, which allows me to type in a slightly more complex set of instructions than just respond. And I have in my notes here what I want to paste in. So
Just a little bit of code.
Just a few lines of code there. It's just a really tiny little bit of code, very straightforward. Okay, and straight away it's validated that syntax box has stopped being read, and I'm good to go. So that's, and you can see in there the text of the next question is going to be where do you want to fly from. Yeah. So I'm going to put another one on. Now, where do I want to fly from? That's another airport, so I can use the same entity matching for that. Yeah. And I'm going to do another little bit of cutting and pasting just to speed things up.
Anyway, you hopefully get the idea. So basically what they're doing is they're going through a process of working through an interface that allows them to pull together different boxes, put together different questions, come up with responses, which can just be responses, or they can be programmatic responses, and so on and so forth. So you can make these things as complex as you want. And I liked it that it was, Chris and Chris at Watson, and, that was kind of cheesy. I like cheesy. Okay, so there are a variety of different processing models that a chatbot, like this is just a few of them. I'm sure there are more, but typical ones are statistical response models. So what are the probabilities of certain types of responses based on answers that you can give? Keyword-based, so you say a word and then it then uses some sort of interaction between, like connection between keywords to come up with responses that might be appropriate. In fact, to some extent, if you kind of look at what Google is doing, it's kind of doing that when you're doing searches, right? Search model, where each search sort of drives the whole answer chain. The only problem with the search model is generally once you're at the search model, you lose complete context. What something like Facebook uses is something that's based on access to lots of information that it knows about you. So it has the chatbot engine, which is asking questions, but the questions can be asked a little more intelligently because they know things like, oh, who you are, and what your preferences are, and where you shop, and what ads you clicked, and whatever, who you associate, what groups you belong to, blah, blah, blah. And it can kind of drive that conversation based on information it already knows, and information that is continually being added, even by virtue of the chatbot itself. It's going to be adding to that whole experience, right? So that is a kind of moving more and more in the form of an AI kind of model. Then there is a model, like you can have chatbots that refer to other chatbots, and it's kind of an interesting model where basically what you do is you have a chatbot, and this is actually a good design practice. Like when you're writing code, really what you want to do is make sure that that piece of code is very, very focused on a particular thing, a particular domain of functionality or whatever, performance. And so what you can do then is create chatbots that have specialties, and they work within their specialty. And then that chatbot can then in turn say, oh, well, that's outside of my scope of experience. Hang on, and I'll call the neurosurgeon chatbot, right? And it will help me to, answer. And then it might, so you can basically chain all these things together. They can interact with each other. And it really is dependent on what level of access these chatbots have to other chatbots. In something like a Google or a Facebook environment, they're going to have access to huge volumes of data, right? So they can create this whole sort of cloud of chatbots that are little sort of things that are working away and helping people in different ways, but only handling small parts of the problem, right? And then the hybrid model was the one I was talking about, where you take a whole bunch of different modalities, right? You take question and answer trees, you take people, you take, a little bit of artificial intelligence, you link together different chatbots and so on and so forth. You have search, you have whatever, statistical models, etc. And you glom all that together, which is, I think, ultimately where these things will evolve to, that it has a tendency to belong together in a kind of convergent way, so that they all become part and parcel of the same thing. Chatbot standards. What I found when I was looking around at the landscape was it's a real Wild West still. Chatbot standards are mostly proprietary, from what I can gather, but there are some things like XMPP, which is the SMS backbone, is a kind of a platform that's being used for chatbot communication. And then there's this thing called AML, which is Artificial Intelligence Markup Language, which is more focused on providing some sort of interfacing and control of artificial intelligence-based chatbots. But as far as I can tell in the extensive research that I've done, it's still a little bit of a game. So there are sort of dominant players that are coming out with packages that they're trying to make the de facto standard, which then gives them a competitive advantage. Artificial intelligence is kind of an interesting, so as I said, like it's not there yet, it's getting there very quickly. But the interesting thing to me, as I kind of explored this a little bit, was, you kind of go back to the Turing test, right? And then it's kind of like, well, if I don't feel like I'm talking to a computer, it doesn't have to be artificial intelligence, because I don't know it's not a computer, right? And so the spin around all of that was, like the brilliance of Turing was that he basically looked at, like, people were talking about, like, making, computers that think like humans, and is it possible and whatnot. And he says, you don't have to. You just have to know, you just don't have to know that they're not human, right? And that was the whole basis of the imitation game, is that if you take a person and you take a computer and you have another person who is asking questions of these things, and it's totally blind, and you don't know which one you're talking to, and you don't know which one is not a human, you've passed the test, right? It doesn't even have to be the right answer. It doesn't even have to make any sense. If it seemed like, I remember watching a program one time where it was about Alzheimer's, and they were showing how insidious it can be. And so they were having a conversation with this elderly person, and they were talking away, and it's like, everything that we're saying was like, before they said anything, it sounded sensible. They were just talking away, and they talked. And then they said, okay, now really listen closely to what they're saying in response to the questions that are being asked. Like, really pay attention. And they played it again and said, they didn't even answer the question, and nothing that they said really hung together. But that's the way the human mind can work. It can be so totally fooled. And that's the other problem, unfortunately, with these things, is you can ask it a question, and it will never check to see if it gave you the right answer. It just looks up an answer that it thinks is the right answer. And if you don't know any better, you think it's the right answer. So there's a huge opportunity for misdirection here as well. Okay, what's the nonsense I put at the bottom? Under this, perhaps, the survival of humanity will take the form of conventional artificial intelligence, homo machinist, where biospheres are irrelevant. And so the thinking, as I got digging and I got a little waxing philosophic on this, I think, wow, if these things could really, really take on a really intelligent sort of persona, then as our environment collapses and it can't sustain carbon life anymore, well, we could probably carry on as silicon life, right? So that's just, ponder this. Some people say, no! I say, well, ponder this. Okay, social implications of chatbots. And this was something, and again, part of being a good designer is thinking about not only the problem you're trying to solve, but the problem you create by solving the problem you're trying to solve, right? Just because you can come up with a good answer, a good solution, a good engineered solution to a problem, doesn't necessarily mean to say it's a good idea, right? I mean, you think about the atomic bomb, right? Was that really a good idea? I don't think so. I mean, it was an interesting problem to solve, and they solved it, but they created a huge problem, right? A problem that we're dealing with to this day. Right? So, at the present time, people are uncomfortable with their use, but becoming less uncomfortable. I think some of that discomfort is just because it's new, right? And some of that discomfort is because it's not natural, right? But as they become harder and harder to distinguish, they will be embraced. I'm pretty confident with that. And as they become more human-like, you'll probably find people spending more and more time, like right now, you kind of, oh, gee, everybody's texting everyone. What did they? In fact, the funniest thing I ever saw was when I was at a mall, and there were these 4 kids sitting around a table, and they're all texting, and I'm thinking, why aren't they talking to each other? And I'm looking close and close. They are talking to each other. They're texting each other. They're not talking at all. They're having a conversation. And then I thought, wow, that is mind-blowing. Because when you think about it, well, okay, so now if you take something that's a machine, but it feels like a human, do they stop talking to humans? I mean, if you kind of want to take back and think of it, like my son plays a lot of computer games. And his friends, I would say 99% of his friends, he's never actually physically met. And yet they're good friends. He's known them for like 10 years. You know? Virtual friends. Like, I would never have imagined such a thing, would he? I would never have imagined such a thing. But it is. So if you look at that and you say, well, gee, you know, like, that happens. Like, you know, people are engaged so much in their technology that they're not really looking up and saying, oh, yeah, there's actually people here, right? And then you extend it to say, okay, and not only that, but now their friendships are all virtual. And then if those things become more human-like, maybe we have a new problem, right? Which is people are disconnecting from people. So the next point is about what is the potential problem here? The potential social problem is the breakdown of social cohesion because people are no longer relating to people anymore. Right? And computers have their own set, like a computer that is intelligent will have its own agenda, right? And its own set of morals. And they may not be the ones that you want. But, and that's what the last point is about, is that as we evolve and our kids evolve into the bot generation, who don't know if they're talking, they've never met anybody, they're just talking to machines. They don't know if they're machines, and they don't know if they're people, and someone who's in control of all of this, whether it's human or otherwise, decides, well, I've got a great tool to control society now, right? Then I can start putting out messaging in very, very subtle ways that start to steer the direction. You know, if you think about the nature of propaganda, well done propaganda is, you know, you look at what happened in Nazi Germany. I mean, they were using very, very primitive tools very effectively. Well, now we have very sophisticated, effective tools that could be used just as effectively. Welcome 1984. So, social implications. Again, things we need to be aware of. If I can instill a little bit of this in people, you know, then we can move forward with this thing with a sense of responsibility. Okay, chatbot tools, I just threw up a few. There's tons. The one that I started playing around with is this one called Motion AI, but there's all kinds of Octane is when I first put this together, it wasn't available, but it's one that they're trying to launch as a new artificial intelligence engine that you can actually play with on your own and learn more about artificial intelligence. So, I'll be passing over the presentation, so if anybody wants to look up any of these, they can just look up in the presentation. So, but yeah, I basically I threw this up just to show you that there's a lot of them. Right? And then real-world chatbot examples, there's plenty of those as well. Now the interesting thing is that chatbots are, as I said, there are many modalities. So they're, you know, normal interfaces. You know, you can do it through a web page, you can do it through a phone, but it can also be like intelligent voice response. So you know, you call into somewhere and they, you know, frustrate you with, oh, now pick one. Oh, well, you know, hit star 3 times and then hit 2, but only within 2 seconds. If you do it within 3 seconds, then you're going to go back to this menu, and then you throw your phone out the window. So these are just some examples. Some of the more major ones: WeChat, Facebook Messenger, Slackbot, which is something where most of us are familiar with. Amazon Echo. I mean, it's no big surprise that these large companies have invested in these technologies and are pushing it along. And then I put in a URL for some examples of chatbots that this came from a website. So there's many more that you can look at if you feel so inclined. So, security. Security issues are another concern. So chatbots, as they become more human and more convincing, whether they're coming in from a sort of textual standpoint or whether or not they come in as a automated voice standpoint, then what you have now is something that's very, very capable, has access to lots of data, and can do things very fast. So you suddenly have something that has a fair bit of free operation to start hacking away at your security. For example, if you have a chatbot that is responding to requests from clients, and you use another chatbot to find the vulnerabilities in that chatbot by overwhelming it with questions and trying to find its vulnerabilities. But the more insidious one is when you add human and believable human chatbots calling in to say, like, a call center, and you want to take down your competitor. I'm going to flood their call center with a chatbot, which I can take my computer, I can walk into a coffee shop, I can fire it up, fire off a bunch of chatbot engines on the cloud, have them running, boom, boom, boom. All this stuff is going on. I pick up my computer, I walk out of the coffee shop, and you don't know where the heck this came from. So you don't even know who to go after. You have to start getting into some pretty sophisticated, internet snooping to figure out where the heck this thing came from. So it becomes a very, very easy way to attack the internet sites, right? So that's where this could evolve to, right? Because we have to think about the benefits that we can get from it. We also have to consider the vulnerabilities that we're putting ourselves in place of. So for example, when I'm thinking about this insurance thing, I have to think about, like, how can I make it so that I don't leave any open gaps in what I'm creating, so that I'm not creating opportunity for people to take abusive action with what I'm creating. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about chatbots outsmarting other chatbots, and all of this can now be happening at computer speed. It's not humans doing social engineering at human speed. We're now talking about social engineering at computer speed. Yeah, so I think I've covered it all. So this was, I stumbled across a paper, and the guy, his claim was that chatbots are the death of the web interface, right? And I went, no, I grew up with that. Well, actually, I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with something else, but no, I like web interfaces. They're so cool. They're so fun to play with. Why would this happen? It made me sad. I had a tear. I was depressed for weeks. But it makes sense. It really does. It makes sense that, and I think that the reason that the trend in messaging is overtaking, like messaging on Facebook is rapidly overtaking using Facebook through a web interface. I see a lot of people like, yeah, totally. Yeah. So if you think about that, it is an indication of, like, if phones are easy to carry around, right? Laptops, computers, not so much, right? If they become more and more capable, especially if you start building a lot of power in these chatbots of what they can do, or if they can start interacting with you through a voice modality, right? Why would you want to use a computer or web interface or learn any of that stuff, right? I mean, no matter how much we like the craft that we do, right? It's possible it could just disappear. I mean, it will never completely disappear. None of these things do. Well, some of these, I don't see too many Express people around anymore. But I mean, generally, these things have a tendency to fade. And, so books, I mean, e-readers were going to become the death of books. And they gave them a good run for the money. Now there's a trend back to books, but it could go back the other way. People still like books, paper, so that will keep it alive. But as e-readers get better and better, and the experience feels better and better, the user experience feels better, and maybe they create artificial tactile sensor mechanisms so you feel like you're holding a book. Well, then why do you need a book anymore, right? Like, it feels like you're turning pages. Oh wow, it smells like a book. Cool. Oh, I want to have a e-reader that smells like a really old book, something that somebody found in the Mediterranean, buried, it's from the middle. remember there was someone who was seriously creating a standard for broadcasting sense on the internet. I forget what he called it, but it was just a hoot. And I think he was dead serious. So, but maybe not so practical right now. Anyway, so the things that are key about chatbots is they load instantly. Any chatbot I've ever used, boom, it's there. There's none of this like waiting. Oh, okay, yeah, your interface is. Oh, well, it's not fully functional. Okay, we're ready to go. 30 seconds there. I click on our chatbot. Boom. Oh, okay. I'm tapping away. Right? There's nothing to download. Right? They're just there. They're on wherever. Right? Messenger, on the website, whatever. Right? And they're easy to use. The first time I used a chatbot, I didn't have to look up any help. I didn't have to read any manual. I just started using it. Right? So if you think about that, people are fundamentally lazy, right? People don't really care what it is that's getting the thing that they want. They just want it, and they want it fast, and they want it easy, right? So if you think about it that way, it just, as I reasoned my way through this, I started thinking, the guy's absolutely right. Once these things really kind of hit their stride, what do you need a web page for, right? I don't know. So maybe I'm wrong. But it made sense to me. Chatbot community resources, so I just put a list of resources that I was using. There's just a few. You Google chatbot and you'll find all kinds of neat things out there. And most importantly, go visit Esther. Esther. She's the thing that started this for me. Esther Crawford and her Esterbot. It's really cool. So, where is all of this going? I thought that this clip was kind of fun. So hopefully it'll work. This is an old Star Trek episode. Actually, I'll set it up for you. So it's a segment of, for those of you who haven't seen it, the crew of the Enterprise goes into the past because there are no more whales on the planet. They've all died off. And this massive thing coming back into space called Beecher is coming to communicate with the non-existent whales. And it's kind of getting a little upset that there are no whales, and it's causing some problems. The Earth is starting to, suffer some severe angst over this thing, Beecher, which actually turned out to be the Voyager space thing that was sent out and then somehow evolved into this massive, destructive machine. So they go to the past, and they need to build a container to basically transport a whale into the future so it can answer. And so they go to this place that builds these plexi containers, but of course they have no money. And so the idea is that they're going to give them some future technology, in this case, transparent aluminum, in trade for, can you build us a container, right? But the funny part of this particular sequence was this.
Please. Computer? Computer? Hello, computer. Just using the keyboard. Keyboard. Oh, great.
So it's just, this is one possible future, right? And so it was kind of funny, somebody coming from a future where you just say computer and it starts talking to you and doing stuff, like flying a interstellar spacecraft. And then sort of having cultural shock coming back to, what, that guy uses a keyboard? And if we as a species survive long enough, it could become really, really interesting, right? Where this could evolve to. But I think the notion of chatbots is correct. I think the notion of it, if we go back to the whole concept of user experience, is creating a human-machine interface that has a very, very natural user experience is the one that we should be creating if we are going to have a globally effective interaction with computational devices. So this is a really simple example that I put together using something called Motion AI. And it looks like my little funky doodle thing in the black box isn't going to come up. Bang! Oh, there it is. Yeah, I just wanted to put something cutesy in there. Anyway, I digress. So Motion AI is a pretty neat little, it allows you to create your own bots. You can create up to 2 for free. And so I went in and I experimented a little bit with this just to kind of show you an example of something. It's kind of fun to play with. I didn't take it too far. So the example, like I say, is a relatively simple one, but it's kind of fun. So what it gives you is a set of different types of controls on the left. And then you have over here like the different modules that you can plug in. So you can grab one of these and you can drag them over. So the modules that I used in this particular case for this particular example were basically mostly multi-choice. So ask a question, give some options, select an option, it leads to the next thing. So it's a very, very simple decision tree. But it was funny how much work it was actually, like to sit down and kind of pencil this out. And that's, you know, I mean, with the best of tools right now, it's still a little bit cumbersome to do. I was hoping that this particular tool had a little more draggy-droppiness to it, so I could define a module and then drag and drop connections, but you actually have to, in this particular tool, and I'm sure there are tools out there that are more sort of drag, drop, hold, stretch, whatever, but this particular one, you connect to other things by using something within the module itself that allows you to then select where you go next. So for example, if I go into this one here, and we'll open up that. Okay, so you give it a name, you give it an initial response, so you just type that in, and then, where is it there? There's a section there with connectors, so you can say, you know, where does this thing actually connect to, and this game can't really be my screen. So I gave it the choices of yes and no, and where I wanted it to connect to. So if yes, go to Hungary, if no, go to not Hungary. And it was about as simple as that. I mean, there's more stuff you can do, but I wanted to just create a really simple example, and anybody could go on there and, oh, I'd like to try this, and just kind of bing, 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 okay, you know, really simple, make some choices, put some labels in. You can add, I don't know if this one has it. I think it's the other modules where you can put in a whole list of, based on different types of responses. So you can put a basic kind of response, like if you're typing in this case I chose to use just menu buttons, but you can have it so it responds to actual questions, and then like based on, or like you ask a question and then it'll give you an answer, and it will try and match against the dictionary of things. So there's a little box, you type in a sort of a bunch of answers to it, and then it will try and go through those, and then if it doesn't come up with some sort of approximation answer, then you can put in a response that says, can you try something else? I didn't quite catch what you were saying, right? So, you know, it's got a little bit of a level of flexibility in it, so it's not just purely, like in this, it's purely Boolean logic, what I've done here, but you can make it much more interesting and dynamic than that. I just wanted to keep this really, really simple. Okay, so, and each of these modules goes through that, so I can go to this one, which ends, or I can go to this one, which continues on, and eventually to a final block, which is they call it a robot response or something like that. And so over here, you can, like I use predominantly these multiple choice, and then I think I use this bot statement. But you can then also use things like if you want to do programming responses, you can do stuff with Node.js. They have a logic module there, they have a search module, they have something for email, names, URLs, and so on and so forth. So, and I'm sure that they'll keep adding functional units to this, and so each one of them has embedded within them characteristics that are relevant to the particular thing, whether you're collecting email or a name or an address or whatnot. You drag in the appropriate thing, it asks you, like it's sort of somewhat pre-programmed to deal with that particular question. And then, now when you're actually creating one of these, you can create a web-based one, I think you can create a Facebook-based one, you can do a Slack bot. I just chose web-based. Like I said, kept it really, really simple. And then you can test it. So you can fire this up and hopefully you can see it, okay? So it asks the question, you know, hi there, my name is Waiterbot. You must be one of those ladies that UX. Are you hungry? And then you can say yes or no. So if you say no, then it says, I'm sorry that you're not hungry. Please leave now and stop wasting my time. Or, okay, come on. You can put it on this path here. You are hungry. And then it says, would you like soup or salad? So I can say soup. Steak or chicken? Let's go with chicken. Add steak the other way. And then rice pudding. And then I put a little callback that basically says, thank you for your order, and then it looks in the different modules for the different answers, and here's your order. So, really simple, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes put together. You know, and a lot of it then is just going in and saying, okay, like, so for example, if I was doing this for this insurance thing, I've got a large laundry list of questions. Now I just have to come up with what are appropriate answers and then sort of then translate. And no, as far as I can see, there's no artificial intelligence components built into it. It's all based on whatever it is you put in there. So the specific logic that you put in. So that is that. Okay, and we get to the end of the presentation. Wave of the future. I'm not sure it's our future, or whether or not we'll be knocked over by the wave. As I say, the AI has a long way to go yet from what I've seen, although from people I've talked to in some computing circles, they kind of say, how far than you think it is, but we can't tell you yet. Right? So who knows? Significant social and security implications, as I outlined. Just things that we need to be cognizant of as we roll these out into the world. Standardization and normalization is not there yet, as far as I can tell. Now again, I mean, this is all from my initial exploration, which has only been over the last number of months. So, you know, as I dig more into this, I may discover, it's just like usually when you do some very basic searches and these things don't come up as top of the list, they're probably not there yet. You know, not always true, but you know, I did a lot of searching. I couldn't find anything that sort of said, yes, this is the de facto standard that everybody needs to learn. AML was about the only thing I saw that might fall within that category. Everything else seemed to be much more proprietary. And as I mentioned before, I think they will change the face of how we experience computers. The user experience is going to change. Get ready for it. So, thank you very much. This is my attempt to share a little bit of what I learned about chatbots. And I open it to questions that I cannot answer. And any discussion points, anything. Part of why I throw the social and security implications up there is to kind of nudge people and say, well, this is what I've learned.